The dust never settled in Bentley Springs. It hung in the air like unfinished business, coating everything in a fine gray powder that tasted of drought and broken promises. 12-year-old Jake Miller stood outside Dalton Ranch's main gate, his worn sneakers pressing into gravel that crunched like teeth grinding, watching his mother's shoulders shake as she walked back from the enormous house that sat like a crown on the hill above them. She'd gone to ask for more time, more grace, more mercy from a man who'd never offered any of those things to people like them. Jake knew from the way she moved, slow and defeated, like something vital had been carved out of her, that the answer had been no. Again. Always no from men like Franklin Dalton, who owned half the county and acted like he owned the souls of everyone who owed him money. The medical bills from his mother's illness had piled up like snow in a killing winter. Silent, relentless, suffocating. The cancer was gone now, burned out by treatments that had saved her life and destroyed their savings. The debt sat between them at every meal, an invisible guest that ate their hope and left nothing but worry in its place. "Mom," Jake said as she reached him, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She'd cried all her tears months ago. Now there was just exhaustion. "We have 60 days," she said, her voice hollow. "Then the bank takes the house, your father's house." She didn't say the rest, that the house was all they had left of him, all they had left of the man who died when Jake was 7, leaving behind a widow, a son, and an old training corral that no one used anymore. Jake's hands curled into fists at his sides, nails biting into palms already calloused from work that 12-year-olds shouldn't have to do. What did he say? What did Dalton say? His mother's jaw tightened. He laughed, Jake. He actually laughed. Said people like us should learn to live within our means, that medical care is a luxury we should have considered before seeking treatment. Her voice broke slightly on the last word. He said we had 60 days to pay $30,000 or he'd foreclose personally. Said he's been wanting our land for years. Something hot and fierce ignited in Jake's chest. Not just anger, but something sharper, something that tasted like the metallic bite of determination. His father had taught him that anger without purpose was just noise, but anger focused into action, that could move mountains, or at least confront millionaires. "I'm gonna talk to him," Jake said, already moving toward the ranch entrance. "Jake, no." But he was running, his legs carrying him up the long gravel drive that wound between white fences, where horses worth more than his mother's life grazed on grass greener than anything that grew in Bentley Springs' poor neighborhoods. The house rose before him like a monument to excess, all stone and glass and the particular arrogance of wealth that didn't understand its own. Cruelty. Franklin Dalton stood on the front porch, a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and a smile that had never reached his eyes. He was talking to his ranch foreman, a hard-faced man named Carter, when Jake skidded to a stop at the bottom of the porch steps, breathing hard, his worn shirt sticking to his back with sweat. "Mr. Dalton," Jake said, his voice steadier than he felt. Dalton turned, his expression shifting from surprise to amusement. "Well, the boy's got spirit. Come to beg too. Come to ask you to give us a fair chance." Jake climbed 2 steps, putting himself closer to eye level. "We'll pay what we owe. We just need more time." "Time?" Dalton savored the word like expensive wine. "Time is money, boy, and you people have neither." He glanced at Carter, sharing a look that made Jake's stomach twist. "Your father thought he was special too, thought he could train horses better than anyone, make a living with those soft methods of his. Look where that got him." Jake's jaw clenched. "My father was a good man." "Your father was a fool who died broke." Dalton descended 1 step, looming over Jake with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced consequences for his words. "And you're following right in his footsteps. Then give me a chance to prove you wrong." The words came out before Jake's brain caught up with his mouth, before caution could strangle courage. "Let me earn the debt forgiveness. Give me a task, something I can do." Dalton's eyebrows rose, genuine surprise flickering across his face before being replaced by something darker. Entertainment. He looked at Carter again, and something unspoken passed between them. Then Dalton smiled, and it was the smile of a man who just thought of the perfect joke. "A task," Dalton mused. "You want to earn your mother's debt forgiveness through labor? How quaint." He gestured toward the training arena, visible beyond the main barn, where a massive black stallion paced the fence line like a caged storm. "You see that horse? That's Thunder. Cost me $250,000. Been trying to train him for 2 years. He's thrown every rider I've put on him, state champions, professional wranglers, men with decades of experience." Jake followed his gesture, seeing the stallion clearly for the first time. Thunder was enormous, easily 17 hands, with a coat so dark it seemed to absorb light. His muscles rippled beneath his skin as he moved, power barely contained, and even from this distance Jake could see the wildness in his eyes. Not meanness exactly, but something untamed and unbroken. "If you can ride Thunder," Dalton continued, his voice dripping with mockery, "if you can stay on his back for 60 seconds without being thrown, I'll clear your mother's entire debt. Every penny. You'll own your house free and clear." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Carter snorted, barely suppressing laughter. Even Dalton's smile widened, confident in the impossibility of what he'd just offered. "And if I can't?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then you stop wasting my time, and your mother pays what she owes in 60 days, or loses everything." Dalton descended the remaining steps until he stood directly in front of Jake, towering over him. "Do we have a deal, boy?" Jake should have said no. Should have recognized the trap, the humiliation being constructed around him. But he thought about his mother's tired eyes, about the house his father had built with his own hands, about the debt that was crushing them both, and he thought about his father's voice, patient and kind, teaching him that horses weren't conquered, they were understood. "We have a deal," Jake said. Dalton's hand shot out and they shook, the millionaire's grip crushing, meant to intimidate. "Good. Let's say 2 weeks? That gives you time to prepare. I'll even let you visit Thunder, get acquainted. Not that it'll matter. That horse is a devil, and you're just a kid playing with forces you don't understand." He released Jake's hand and turned away, dismissing him. But as Jake walked back down the drive, his heart hammering against his ribs, he caught movement at the arena fence. Thunder had stopped pacing. The stallion stood perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on Jake with an intensity that made the boy's breath catch. For just a moment, boy and horse locked gazes across the distance, and Jake saw something in Thunder's eyes that Dalton and all his expensive trainers had missed. Not violence, not evil, just fear and pain, and the desperate wariness of something that had been hurt and was determined never to be hurt again. Jake understood that feeling, understood it down to his bones. That night, after his mother had cried and yelled and finally reluctantly accepted that Jake wasn't backing down, he walked to the old training corral his father had built on the back edge of their property. The fence was weathered but sturdy. The gate still swung on oiled hinges, and in the center of the space where his father had worked his quiet magic with troubled horses, Jake stood and remembered, his father's voice patient and warm. "Horses don't want to be broken, Jake. They want to be understood. You listen first, always listen, and they'll tell you everything you need to know." Jake had been 7 when his father died, too young to inherit his skill, but old enough to remember the lessons. He had 2 weeks to remember everything. The first night, Jake didn't even try to approach Thunder. He simply sat outside the stallion's paddock after finishing his chores at home, after his mother had finally stopped arguing and fallen into the exhausted sleep that was all she could manage these days. The ranch was quiet at midnight, just the sounds of horses shifting in their stalls and the wind moving through the cottonwood trees that lined the property. Thunder stood at the far end of his enclosure, a shadow among shadows, but Jake could feel the weight of the stallion's attention like a physical thing, watching, assessing, deciding if this small human was a threat or just another disappointment waiting to happen. Jake didn't speak, didn't move, just sat with his back against the fence post and let the night settle around them both. 2 creatures learning to exist in the same space without violence or fear. The second night, he brought an apple, not to feed Thunder, not yet, but to eat himself, making a point of the simple act of taking care of his own hunger. He sat in the same spot and ate slowly, the crunch of each bite deliberate and unhurried. Thunder's ears flicked forward, curious about the sound. After an hour, the stallion moved 10 feet closer. Progress. The third night, rain came, and Jake sat in it, letting the water soak through his jacket and plaster his hair to his skull. Thunder stood under the shelter at the back of the paddock, dry and watching this foolish human boy who apparently didn't have the sense to come in from the storm. But when the rain turned to downpour and Jake still didn't move, Thunder took 3 steps out into the weather, stood in the rain himself, mirroring, understanding something that couldn't be put into words but lived in the space between intention and action. By the 5th night, Thunder was standing close enough that Jake could see the scars. They ran along the stallion's flanks, thin white lines that spoke of whips and spurs, of trainers who'd tried to force submission through pain. Jake's hands curled into fists seeing them, rage burning hot and clean in his chest. "They hurt you," Jake said softly, the first words he'd spoken in Thunder's presence. "They tried to break you because they didn't know how else to reach you." Thunder's ears pinned back slightly, not aggression, just wariness at the sound of a human voice. But he didn't bolt, didn't retreat. "I won't hurt you," Jake continued, keeping his voice low and even. "I just want to understand you, want you to understand me. We've both lost things we can't get back, both been hurt by people who had more power than kindness." The stallion's ears came forward again, and Jake saw something shift in those dark eyes. Recognition, maybe, or at least the possibility of it. That same night, Jake began working with Banner, a skittish rescue mare that boarded at the stable near his house. She'd been abused too, though not as severely as Thunder, and she let Jake practice the techniques his father had taught him, the slow approach, the careful reading of body language, the offering of trust without demanding it in return. He learned to move without threat, to communicate through posture and breath, and the particular quality of attention that let an animal know you saw them as an individual rather than a thing to be used. The nights developed a rhythm. Jake would spend 2 hours with Banner, rebuilding muscle memory and confidence. Then he'd walk to Dalton Ranch and sit with Thunder, speaking, as softly about nothing and everything, his father, his mother, the debt that hung over them like a sword. Thunder listened with the grave attention of a creature who understood that words could carry weight beyond their meaning. On the 8th night, Thunder approached the fence where Jake sat, close enough that Jake could have reached through and touched him if he'd wanted to. But Jake kept his hands in his lap, respecting the boundary the stallion was still maintaining, understanding that trust couldn't be rushed or forced. "You're afraid," Jake said quietly, "not of being ridden. You're afraid of being hurt again, of trusting something that'll just cause more pain." Thunder's nostril flared, breath steaming in the cold night air. His eyes, so dark they seemed to hold all the accumulated suffering of every creature that had ever been mistreated, fixed on Jake with an intensity that made the boy's chest tight. "I'm afraid too," Jake admitted. "Afraid of failing my mom, afraid of losing the only home I've ever known, afraid that I'm not enough, that I'll never be enough to fix what's broken." The stallion made a sound low in his throat. Not quite a whinny, something softer, almost like understanding. The next morning, Jake woke to find his mother standing at the kitchen window, staring out at nothing. The bills were spread across the table, medical statements marked "final notice" in red letters that might as well have been written in blood. "We can still back out," she said without turning around. "Tell Dalton you've changed your mind. Find another way." "There is no other way." Jake poured himself water from the tap, drinking it in one long swallow. "And I'm not backing out." "He's setting you up to fail, Jake, to humiliate you, to humiliate us." Her voice cracked. "Your father would never want you risking yourself like this." "Dad would want me to try." Jake set the glass down carefully. "He taught me that some things are worth the risk, that standing up to bullies matters even when you might lose." His mother finally turned, and the fear in her eyes nearly broke his resolve. But beneath the fear was something else, pride, reluctant, but undeniable. "You're so much like him," she whispered. "So much." That night, Thunder let Jake touch him for the first time. Just a brief contact, Jake's fingers brushing the stallion's muzzle through the fence, but the significance of it rang like a bell through Jake's entire body. Thunder didn't pull away, didn't pin his ears or show teeth, just accepted the touch, processing it, deciding it was safe. "Tomorrow," Jake told him, "I'm going to come into your paddock, going to stand with you without a fence between us, and you're going to decide if you can trust me that much." Thunder's response was to step closer, pressing his nose against Jake's palm, breathing in the boy's scent, learning him. Word spread through Bentley Springs like wildfire. The Miller boy was going to ride Thunder. the impossible. Horse, the killer stallion. Everyone knew how this would end, with Jake broken and humiliated, his mother losing everything, and Franklin Dalton proven right once again about the natural order of power and powerlessness. By the 12th day, half the town had decided to attend the spectacle. Dalton, seeing an opportunity for entertainment and the reinforcement of his dominance, encouraged the attention. He had bleachers brought to the main arena, invited reporters from the county paper, turned Jake's desperate gamble into a carnival. Jake learned about it from Carter, Dalton's foreman, who found him at Thunder's paddock on the 13th night. "Boss wants you to know the whole town's coming tomorrow," Carter said, his voice flat, but his eyes holding something that might have been sympathy. 3 o'clock. He's making an event of it. Jake didn't look away from Thunder, who stood calmly beside him now, no fence between them, the stallion's breath warm against Jake's shoulder. "Tell him I'll be there." "Kid," Carter hesitated. "That horse has hospitalized 6 men, Prosga's guys who've been riding since before you were born. You're 12 years old. There's no shame in walking away." "There's every shame in not trying." Jake finally turned to meet Carter's gaze. "He hurt this horse. Your boss and all those pros he hired. They used pain and force and never once asked what Thunder needed. That's why he throws them. Not because he's vicious, because he's protecting himself." Carter looked at Thunder, really looked at him, and something shifted in his expression. "You got him to trust you. We got each other to trust each other." Jake rested a hand on Thunder's neck, and the stallion leaned into the touch like a cat seeking affection. Trust isn't something you take, it's something you earn by proving you won't abuse it. That final night before the challenge, Jake stayed with Thunder until dawn. They stood together in the quiet paddock, boy and horse, breathing in synchronization, hearts beating their separate rhythms that somehow created harmony. Jake whispered everything his father had taught him, every lesson about patience and respect and seeing animals as partners rather than property. And Thunder listened, remembered, chose. The arena was packed. Jake arrived to find what looked like the entire population of Bentley Springs crowding the bleachers, vendors selling food, an atmosphere more suited to a rodeo than the private humiliation Dalton had originally intended. The millionaire sat in a special box seat, surrounded by his wealthy friends, all of them wearing expressions of anticipation that made Jake's stomach turn. His mother stood near the gate, her face pale, but her chin raised with the stubborn dignity that had carried her through cancer and widowhood, and the slow, grinding poverty that followed. When she saw Jake, she pressed a hand to her mouth, and he saw her lips move in what looked like a prayer. Thunder was led into the arena by 2 handlers holding tight to lead ropes, the stallion's head high and his eyes showing white around the edges. But it wasn't wildness Jake saw there. It was discomfort, confusion, something wrong in the way Thunder moved. Jake's eyes went to the tack, the saddle cinched too tight, the bit pulled at an angle that had to be painful, everything adjusted to cause maximum discomfort. Dalton's final trick, making sure Thunder would explode the moment anyone tried to mount him. "Ready, boy?" Dalton called from his box, his voice carrying across the arena through the PA system some technician had set up. "Everyone here's excited to watch you try to do what professionals couldn't. Don't keep us waiting." Jake walked to the center of the arena where Thunder stood, the stallion's sides heaving with agitated breaths, his muscles bunched and ready to explode. The handlers moved back quickly once Jake arrived, wanting distance from what they were certain would be violence. But Jake didn't immediately try to mount. Instead, he approached Thunder's head slowly, hands visible and non-threatening, speaking in the low voice the stallion had learned meant safety. "I see what they did," Jake murmured, reaching for the cinch. "I see what they're trying to make you do." And then, in front of the entire town, in front of Dalton and his friends and all the people who'd come to watch him fail, Jake began loosening the tack. He adjusted the bit so it sat properly in Thunder's mouth, loosened the cinch to a proper tightness, repositioned the saddle so it didn't rub against old scars. The crowd went silent, confusion rippling through the bleachers. This wasn't the show they'd expected. "What's he doing?" someone whispered, loud enough to carry. "He's helping the horse?" Thunder's breathing slowed as the discomfort eased, his head lowered from its defensive height, and when Jake placed a hand on the stallion's neck, Thunder did something no one in that arena had ever seen him do. He leaned into the touch, seeking comfort from a human, choosing trust over fear. Jake glanced up at Dalton's box. The millionaire had stopped smiling. His face had gone rigid with the dawning realization that his joke wasn't funny anymore, that this impossible thing might actually be about to happen. "You said 60 seconds, Jake called out, his voice steady despite his hammering heart. "Time starts when I mount." He turned back to Thunder, pressing his forehead briefly against the stallion's neck, breathing in the smell of horse and dust and the particular sweetness of trust earned rather than stolen. Then, with movements so smooth and calm they looked like a continuation of the same thought, Jake placed his left foot in the stirrup and swung himself up onto Thunder's back. The arena held its breath. Thunder stood perfectly still, ears forward, processing this new weight on his back that didn't feel like the others, didn't carry threat or demand or the promise of pain. Just sat there, balanced and quiet, asking for nothing except partnership. Jake gathered the reins loosely, his legs barely touching Thunder's sides. "You ready to show them?" he whispered, and Thunder answered by taking one step forward, then another, then breaking into a trot that carried them across the arena in perfect harmony, boy and horse moving together like they'd been doing this for years instead of 2 weeks. There was no bucking, no rearing, no attempt to throw his rider into the dirt, just a stallion who'd finally found someone worth carrying. The 60 seconds passed, then another 60. Jake guided Thunder through figure eights and direction changes, demonstrating not just survival, but genuine partnership. The crowd had gone from silent to erupting, people on their feet, cheering for this impossible thing they were witnessing. But Jake barely heard them. He was somewhere else, riding through that space his father had told him about, where human and animal stopped being separate things and became something unified and beautiful and true. When he finally brought Thunder to a stop in front of Dalton's box, the millionaire's face had gone from pale to red to something beyond color entirely. Fury and humiliation warred in his expression, but he was trapped by his own arrogance, his own cruel joke that had backfired so completely. 60 seconds, Jake said quietly, though the microphones picked it up and carried it through the arena. "My mother's debt is cleared. We had a deal." Dalton's jaw worked soundlessly. Around him, his wealthy friends were applauding, either genuinely impressed or enjoying his discomfort. Either way, there was no escape, too many witnesses, too public a promise. "Fine," Dalton spat finally. "The debt is cleared. Take your mother's paperwork. I'll have my lawyers send the release." He stood abruptly and left the box, unable to stand the sight of his own failure a moment longer. But Jake wasn't watching him leave. He was sliding off Thunder's back, wrapping his arms around the stallion's neck, feeling the powerful heartbeat beneath skin and muscle, knowing that something profound had just happened that went far beyond debt or money, or the petty cruelty of men who mistook power for worth. His mother appeared at the arena gate, tears streaming down her face, and Jake led Thunder to her, the stallion following calmly, his wildness transformed not into submission, but into choice. "You did it," she whispered, reaching up to touch Jake's face. "Baby, you actually did it." "We did it," Jake corrected, his hand never leaving Thunder's neck. "All three of us. Dad's lessons, Thunder's courage, and dumb luck that they underestimated what trust can accomplish." The town gathered around them, not mocking anymore, but offering congratulations, apologies for doubting, wonder at what they'd witnessed. Carter pushed through the crowd and handed Jake a folded paper. "Deed's clear," the foreman said gruffly. "And kid, that was the bravest thing I've seen in 20 years of working horses. Your father would have been proud." As the celebration continued around him, Jake led Thunder back toward the paddock that had been his prison. But at the gate, the stallion stopped, turning to look at Jake with those dark, intelligent eyes that had finally learned it was safe to hope again. "You want to go somewhere else?" Jake asked, understanding suddenly what Thunder was asking. "Somewhere that doesn't hold all these bad memories?" The stallion's ears came forward. Yes. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jake rode Thunder across the open field behind his mother's house. His house now, saved and secure. His mother watched from the porch, one hand pressed to her heart, seeing her son and this impossible horse move together through the tall grass like something out of a dream. Jake felt his father's presence in the rhythm of Thunder's gait, in the whisper of wind through the grass, in the particular quality of light that made everything feel possible and sacred. This was what his father had meant about horses, about trust, about the quiet dignity of understanding rather than dominating. They rode until the stars emerged, and Thunder slowed to a walk, content now, his wildness not broken but transformed into something better, partnership with a boy who'd seen past the fear to the creature beneath who just wanted to be understood. In Bentley Springs, people would talk about this day for years, the day a 12-year-old boy rode the unrideable horse, the day Franklin Dalton's cruelty backfired, the day impossible became possible through patience and trust and the stubborn refusal to accept that broken things couldn't heal. But for Jake, riding Thunder through the gathering dark with his mother's house glowing warm and safe in the distance, it wasn't about the spectacle or the victory or proving anyone wrong. It was about fulfilling the lessons his father had left behind, about honoring a man's memory by becoming the kind of person who saw creatures as partners rather than property, about learning that strength came not from domination, but from the courage to be gentle in a world that too often mistook gentleness for weakness. Thunder nickered softly, and Jake leaned forward to rest against the stallion's neck, breathing in the smell of horse and night and freedom earned through mutual respect. They'd saved each other, he and this horse, both of them lost and hurting and convinced they'd never find anything except more pain. But together, in choosing to trust when trust seemed impossible, they'd found something better than salvation. They'd found home,